I think we're all here. Hi, welcome, filmmakers on Zoom. My name is Emily Upsack, and I am a professor at the University of Colorado in the Department of Moving Image Arts, Cinema Studies and Moving Image Arts.
SWB audio capture, not registered.
Okay. Can you all hear me on Zoom? Yes, we are. Okay. So first, I'd like to just introduce everyone, and maybe you can wave if I'm saying your name on Zoom. So G. Anthony Vatek makes nonfiction films that examine humans' relationship with the natural and urban environments. And he is the director of Some Thoughts on the Common Toad. Hi, Anthony. Ali Vanderkrook's work engages with shifting notions of the self and other in documentary ethics as it relates to ecology, incarceration, archive, and the body. She's the director of Six Knots. Hi, Alan. Janelle, are you? Hi, Janelle. Yes. Vander Kellen, her films imagine alternative acts of relation between imperfect bodies, human, vegetal, geological, or otherwise, and make visible the agency of plants. Direction of the Road is her film. And then Heidi Morstang. Hi, Heidi. 47 degrees Celsius, the last film we just saw. Heidi uses images to explore and offer insight into complex and often subtle tensions and conflicts that characterize places, however beautiful our environment might appear. And then you might recognize the two subjects of the last film. Camille Parmesan is an ecologist and an expert in the effects of global climate change on biodiversity, and Professor Michael C. Singer, a butterfly behavioral ecologist. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. So I thought first we could, let's start with, do you like G. Anthony or Anthony? Maybe unmute. Anthony, you like Anthony because that's what it says, but we can't hear you. Yeah. Eric, anything? Might be on your side, Anthony. Can you unmute? Yeah. Okay, let's try Janelle. Can we hear you?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, wonderful. So, let me just, sorry. Oh, Janelle, your film was so beautifully articulated. And, you know, each one of you had obviously a different process, but either used archival work or elaborated or licensed materials that previously existed. So I'm wondering for each one of you if you can talk about the process of starting these film projects, whether they were commissions or if someone approached you or how you found the material. Yes, Janelle.
Okay. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to start or if we were just checking sound. So Direction of the Road is based on a short story by the literary great Ursula LeGuin. It details exactly what you saw, the story of a tree who experiences the world in a very different way. And I encountered this story about a decade ago. And it lived rent-free in my mind for a very, very long time because I never had the technical tools necessary to tell this story from the vantage point of a tree. And y'all probably noticed it's a very pink film, it's a very blue film, and it's 3D modeled. And the story, it was integral to have this sense of a tree resizing itself, you know, upholding linear perspective in its own way. We move, trees resize themselves, apparently. And it wasn't until I encountered Blender, Maya, 3D modeling that this short film really was possible. So this is one of the longest projects that I've held on to and waited for. I do think it's interesting that all these stories were retellings or usage of previous materials. I wonder if that's integral to how humans are telling stories about the inhuman right now. But I'm interested to hear what other people have to say about their experiences.
And obviously, you got the rights for this work, or was that not necessary?
It's an alteration and a retelling. I altered it enough where it wasn't necessary. So it definitely pays homage to, but is not indebted to in that way.
Okay, great. Maybe we can check your sound, Anthony, and then also it seems like a nice segue, considering George Orwell and
Hi,
Tilda.
do you hear me now?
Yes.
Do you hear me now? Oh, great. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, thank you, first of all, to Manisis and the whole team and everybody for putting this together and including my little film. I've been watching from afar, and I'm just kind of stunned at all the curation and programming. So my film was a commissioned piece. I was commissioned to make a short film for a literary festival in upstate New York in Narrowsburg called the Deepwater Literary Festival. And last year it was George Orwell themed. And I was commissioned to put together a short film that involved Tilda's contributions. And it says my video is gone, but okay.
We can still see.
Okay, but we virtually there was no budget or anything like that, despite her involvement. So all material was sourced offline, off the Internet Archive, Pullinger, all sorts of different sources that I made sure were within the Creative Commons universe. And Tilda read this essay that was selected for the piece, and it was supposed to give an insight into how George Orwell was thinking about the natural world, because we all know him as from 1984 and from Animal Farm and all these kind of dystopian type narratives that tell us very dark story, and this piece shed light on his more, I wouldn't say optimistic, and I wouldn't even say romantic, but kind of like his understanding of the importance of beauty and the natural world within times of conflict or times of war, in this case, World War II. And he did it in this way that I think is extremely smart, of how using, talking about this thing, the toad, that then goes into this critique of capitalism, this critique of how nobody really pays attention to the natural world anymore for all these various reasons, and cynicism is part of it. And I thought it felt extremely relevant to today's time as well. But part of the challenge of making them was, how do you complement that versus how much do you contradict that? Because the essay ends on this optimistic note of, the powers that be can't take away spring. The world will continue to, turn everything, and that's just simply not the case anymore. And so the task I gave myself was to figure out how to challenge that and push back against that in the type of footage that I was using and the kind of tone that I was going for.
Yeah, I thought the use of black and white was really effective in that vein. So great. Heidi. Yes, Heidi. How did you find Michael and Camille, or did they find you? How did your project come about?
Well, I found Camille and Michael through a news article I read. I became really intrigued by their research on butterflies, and I asked if I could get a little insight into the work, and then we started a dialogue we had an ongoing dialogue for several years, and then Camille got the award to part of her work to communicate climate change, and I was then invited in to do the film and come to their fantastic location in California to make the film. So yeah, it's been a really interesting and long time frame. Yeah, so that's how that came about.
And I see in the credits you had a cinematographer with you as well. So there were two of you when for shooting?
Yes, yeah, and yeah, so I worked with him on several films, and it's just a way of seeing the world. I think that I really like, and that, and also with the sound designer that I'm working with after in post production. That yeah, so very few people on board, but it works well.
And Camille and Michael, was this the first film project that you've been involved with? And how did you like the outcome? It's a love story as well as a climate change story.
So I've been part of several documentary films, including BBC. I guess the first one was Planet Earth. And then, there have been several more like that, which I would say they're wonderful, but they're very traditional nature documentaries where, they come out to the field, they photograph something of the field and the butterflies, and then they interview me. And, really what you're getting are my answers to the interview questions with an overview, from the field. This was really different. And I guess it's, what is it called? Cinema Verite, someone was telling me earlier, because what Heidi did is she just mic'd us and filmed us for, I think it was 4.5 days. And Heidi, aren't you going to interview me? No. I want this to be in your own words. Well, what do you want us to talk about? Whatever you normally talk about. I'm like, what? Seriously?
Talk to the butterflies.
So, I mean, it really is just the way we are in the field. And Heidi, I mean, this is the beauty of, I learned a lot about making movies because Heidi managed through her editing to turn it into a story and a movie. And I was astonished. And I don't know, tens of hours of footage she had to listen to and look through to do that astounds me. And that just, she pulled it all together. Yeah. So I learned a lot in watching her work.
Michael, how about you? The outcome of the film? Did you enjoy watching it today?
Is this working? Yeah. Okay. I've seen it before, and I agree with Camille. It hangs together better than I would have thought possible. And it really, Heidi really didn't ask us to do anything. We just went about our normal work, and we wore mics for 4 days. And I'm sure there are some things that we wouldn't have wanted to be in the film that aren't in it. And what Camille didn't say is that when David Attenborough sent his crew out to film us, we put a lot of work into it. But it was so long ago that they used film, and they were British. And we were working in the Sierra Nevada at 7,000 feet elevation. When they'd finished, they went down to the glamorous city of Fresno and left their film in a hot car and ruined it. And boy, did we work hard on that film. And so that was a very different experience. The PBS did, well, it wasn't PBS, but there was a film, a documentary. Passion Films.
Via PBS.
Yes. And the filming was lovely. The science they put in was not correct. They didn't check it with us.
Correct.
It was
a few
small. A lot of it was. And you apparently said something about how climate change would be the end of the human species, which you must have qualified by saying, no, as you did here, the end of our civilization. And they cut that out, saying we humans are going extinct. So they made it into an exaggeration.
So I appreciated the honesty of this film. The way Heidi did it was very, yes, honest. This thing is a good way to put it.
Thank you. Yes.
She had no political perspective or no agenda.
No, didn't seem so. Ali, thank you for your film. It was your use of archival material was your hand with it was just so incredible, and also the way you started the film, and that we lingered in that space for quite a while. Can you talk about how you started this process and the various scientists and also First Nations people that you worked with?
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much, and thank you to my nieces for including my film. And I'm very happy to be sitting next to both of you. The line that was my favorite from the film was when you said you were looking for the caravan key to get the desperate female. So brilliant.
Desperate to lay eggs.
Yes, I know.
So
just
if you-
in the context that I know
If
it.
you
it's
keep
quite
her
good.
long enough, she really, really wants to lay eggs. Then all you have to do is what you saw in the film. You put her on a plant that tastes right, and she'll lay the eggs for you.
Right. In terms of my film, it started off as a very different project. I initially was trying to make a film about a river in North Vancouver, which is where I grew up, as a site of death, which I will be making another project about that, so I won't explain it too much. But thinking about waterways as sites of death, I came across the work of Paul Cottrell, who's the marine mammal coordinator for British Columbia, as well as the common term for his job is called a disentangler. And I started reading about his work and found that title and that work to be a perfect metaphor and a perfect starting point to explore this topic. And in terms of my use of archival material, I actually came to the archival material after I'd shot with all of my participants and scientists. And it was only in the editing process that I was able to see the echoes of these gestures that occur in the archival footage versus the footage that I took in a very eerie way, which took the project in a different direction, where I started to think about the legibility of how we look at these animals and like I said, how these gestures sort of repeat themselves, how history repeats themselves, how our methods of extraction can occur very similarly in our methods of documentary filmmaking and the way that we look at the more than human world. And that's very important to me as an artist and just a human, because growing up on the west coast of British Columbia, we're very attuned to our relationship, our settler-colonial relationship. And my mother is an Indigenous land rights lawyer, and so I grew up sort of rejecting the law and how these infrastructures are put in place. And that first animation that I made with all the knots, we do linger in it for a minute, but I think that's really necessary. In the same way, I feel like it's necessary to linger in the more violent imagery that I use, but that's a personal choice. Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about colonial sensorial orders?
Yeah, so the conversation I have at the end is with a brilliant writer and academic who's based out of UBC. His name's Dylan Robinson, and he wrote a book called Hungry Listening, Resonant Theory in Indigenous Sound Studies. And so he primarily studies, obviously, sound and music, but his approach to thinking about settler colonial relationships and Indigenous relationships with each other and with the natural world are essential conversations around thinking about things more relationally and with a more affective sense of understanding, as opposed to one that tries to admit control or mastery over its subject. And obviously we find that in the history of image making and the history of documentary, and the way that I've chosen to interrogate that is sort of ambitious in this film, but I feel like it's encapsulated with that final image of the sort of spyglass image that I have coming out the front of the ship, and the idea of a circle and this notion of the circle as a metaphor for history repeating itself, the circle as, like I said, a spyglass, like how we look through a microscope, the shape of a lens, the the movement that a propeller makes underwater. Like it's everywhere. And so if we actually start to attune ourselves to thinking about these things, we can really challenge our own positionality in how we approach these topics. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Janelle, welcome back. I'm wondering with your piece that you mentioned the color scape and the pinks, and then also the font selection and this and how that really felt synergistic with the sound design. Can you talk about how you sort of visualized this in the making? And also, I think I read that it can be a 3D piece as well, 3-dimensional.
Yeah. So, oh, I'm so sorry. So the kind of red and blue and pink tones of this film were chosen very specifically. It's told in kind of this diaristic, personal cinema style, using the I voice from the point of view of a tree. I really wanted to try to think. There are scientists who are conducting research now and are wondering if plants may be able to sense light in similar ways to how we do. They're expanding boundaries of what sight might be. So I wanted to consider that in relation to this film. And I was trying to think, if a plant is using stomata in a certain way, like a pinhole camera, or if something like that is happening, what light would this tree be sensitive to? And it's probably going to be skewed more to the blue and red and purple sides of the visible light range, because those are the light waves that plants respond well to. If you buy a grow light, it's going to be blue and pink and purple, because that's what plants can capitalize upon. So that was kind of, I was thinking, how would a tree have evolved to view light? And that's the answer that I came up with. And as I was looking at this colorscape, it is very reminiscent of this kind of cyan and scarlet 3D vision that we use when we have those glasses on. So in Blender, you have the option to make things 3D. And I really loved the way that 3D model looked when it was being output for use with those like cyan and scarlet glasses, because it doubled the outlines of things. It troubled where the tree ended and the hill began. And I really liked that as a visualization of a conceptual way of being. What if those boundaries are not quite so clear? We humans love them to be clear, but in reality, our cells are outnumbered by the bacteria in our bodies. So these are some of the things that underpinned how I designed those visual elements. And then the text is the only green thing in the film, which I find very funny because it's a story told by a plant. But I really liked that early computer animation style that is present both in the animation and also in the font used. The font is also kind of reminiscent of X-Files. So there are a lot of kind of cultural touch points that I thought were appropriate as I was considering how to tell this story. And of course, trying to tell a story from another creature's vantage point that is more than human is a flawed experiment. I'll probably never succeed at it. So this is just one iteration of me attempting to do that.
Thank you. So Anthony, you touched on this already in terms of what you were trying to accomplish with the archival footage, with the different imagery, the black and white. I'm curious, there was also these sort of empty gray spaces in between. And if you could just talk a little bit about that. And of course, did you get to work with Tilda Swinton? Did you what was that like? Or did she just get the text, read it, and send it back? And
I'll get the last question out of the way, because that's always a big question mark I get in instances. Hilda is a friend of a friend, and she had agreed to kind of throw her weight behind the festival. And so, yes, I did get to meet with her, and yes, I did get to record with her. You know, she was a two-take wonder, I will say. She read it once or twice, and there wasn't much else that needed to happen. And so that's that. But in terms of the in terms of the gray spaces and the sort of formal structure, how the piece builds, I really didn't want to, as I mentioned, just kind of illustrate what the essay was saying and like use images that sort of fit. There needed to be these breathing spaces, this breathing room where you're just listening to the words, to Orwell words. And so it was really kind of a very intuitive way in which I kind of used these like the gray spots based on rhythm, really of rhythm of the essay and of certain sentences and words that I wanted the viewer to land on and to really listen and not get distracted by the imagery. The imagery at times is quite literal and at times goes totally, you know, is a totally different thing. And I wanted to play with that because I didn't want just the audience to kind of just like get lulled into by the images because it's so easy to do that. We all know that as like filmmakers, like images are so like deceptive and not just deceptive, but just like so appealing. And it's so easy to kind of forget about, especially specifically for the essay type film, to forget to listen to the words. At least it is for me. And so I just wanted to include these kind of pauses that to me felt almost like projection spaces for the audience to kind of project their own imagery and their own thoughts into based on the words that they were hearing. So it was really kind of a rhythmic choice, more than like a conceptual one, I think.
Yeah, it worked. It worked for me. I watched the film twice today, so I really noticed those pauses the second time around. So we're going to open it up in just a minute. I have a question for Heidi in terms of where else the film is played and kind of this idea of the artist lens and the opportunity to synthesize scientific research and information to reach different audiences, and if that's been part of your motivation, and yeah, where the film is played.
Yeah, that's really the aim of the film, to reach a wide range of audiences. So there is a mix of screenings in galleries and art exhibitions, film festivals, in academic settings, and then we are working on reaching groups of people. I'm really interested in people who work with climate change policies, people who can make a change from a different discipline. I love showing the work to other filmmakers and artists because that is my peer group. But I think it's about telling a story and telling really crucial information for the times we live in, and to reach people that might find it difficult to read a scientific report. So that's the film can open up a space for different understanding or different access to it. So it's finding the groups, and I think the film screenings that also has a space for debate and a Q&A like we are doing today is really important, just to engage with audiences. So yes, there's a wide range of audiences.
Thank you. Do we have any questions in the audience?
Hi, thanks for all these films. I thought they were very beautiful and interesting. This is a question for, and I'm sorry, I forgot your name, Will. filmmaker.
Allie.
Allie, hi. I was curious about your relationship to the filmmakers who shot the archival footage of the whales, and how you like thought about your kinship or not with those people. You mentioned that you like felt an impulse to leave images on screen that were violent for audiences to look at, and I wondered whether those filmmakers potentially also were, leaving the footage on screen for a long time, or filming the violence with the same impulse that you had, and how you think about them or what their intentions were.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. They're all government films that were made for historical purposes, and so for the purpose of documentation of that process. And so I think that process was looked at uncritically at the time. There's even in the earlier film, the black and white footage that was taken in the 1920s of them playing with a lot of the parts of a whale, and when he like pulls apart the baleen to like stick his head out, moments like that. I don't think they were looking at that critically. I don't think that they were looking at their actions critically. I think it was a very different time. So I'm not interrogating my relationship to them. It's open access archival footage. And I haven't thought much about their perspective in relationship to mine. I think we would have an interesting conversation if they were alive or present for that conversation. But I haven't thought too deeply about their critical lens. Does that answer your question?
I'm surprised with all the scientists in Boulder. I thought there'd be some heavy hitting science question.
Okay, well, so I asked this question yesterday, and I asked it to filmmakers, which I think didn't maybe make as much sense. But now we have scientists here who work in conservation, so maybe it'd be better directed to you both. And I'm just curious about how you think about conservation. Like I was thinking about the whale being like this charismatic species that helps communicate about the necessity of conservation for the world. And there's like a problem of like, how do we, thinking that we are like running out of time, let's say, how do you think about like the triage of species? Like, do you try to save certain species in certain areas? Is it a question of like saving as many as you can, or in the broadest possible?
So this is something conservation biologists struggle with all the time. We cannot possibly save all species. Humans have already rendered extinct about 10% of the species on Earth. Overhunting and habitat destruction, that's already happened. Climate change is rapidly ramping that up considerably. So we already know we can't save every species. We have to discriminate. We have to prioritize. And, that's the very difficult thing. Some people believe we should prioritize charismatic species because that brings donors in. And then when you get the money in, you can buy up the habitat or manage the habitat. And then you will save a bunch of others as well, right? Others, believe we're losing genetic diversity, and therefore we need to really be thinking harder about preserving our genetic diversity, which means preserving many different kinds of groups, kinds of species, not just focusing on large, charismatic, whales. I love whales. And I absolutely, your film was so sad for me. I'm going to cry again just thinking about it. But that's really important, to be able to connect with people. And when they see, butterflies are kind of good for that, because people do love butterflies and they're beautiful. But there are lots of unbeautiful species that we actually do need to preserve because they're essential to how the ecosystem works. And that's a hard one. So I'm giving you a very long answer. I'll just say this is what people talk about at conservation biology meetings all the time. And everyone's in agreement that if we could save everything, that'd be great, but we can't. Did that answer your question?
One more thing quickly, which is that in a functioning ecosystem, there are species you can remove, lots of them. It doesn't make much difference to the rest. And there are some species you can take out, and there are just cascading effects on the structure of the community and the functioning of the ecosystem. And you don't know which ones they are until you remove them. Which really means you should say what you can.
Well, let's just have one more question. In terms of, it feels like with each one of these films, there was both from a filmic perspective and a scientific perspective, this conversation around the microcosm and the macrocosm, which I think we were just talking about a little bit. But maybe we can end with each filmmaker just touching on that. I think, some thoughts on the common toad. Anthony? The toad and its meaning for you.
Sure. I mean, huge question. How do you go from, appreciating, the toads emerging from winter to, railing against capitalistic exploitation and these like big societal histories and forces and structures and inequalities. And for me, that's kind of the beauty of this essay and this piece, is to really not think of not just cute or funny little code and aha and adorable, that sort of a thing, but really think about that as a really radical reminder of how much this creature challenges all the human, depths and depravities and things that we do to one another. So for me, it is sort of small thing that then expands to, this grand societal kind of question. So micro and macro, maybe that.
Janelle, any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So in the tale of the tree, the climax, the conflict is this moment where a life is lost, and the tree kills a human, of course. So I think bound into the structure there is this thought of the one and the many, but I ultimately think it's a tale of morality, and it's a tale that asks us to question our imposition of human values onto creatures that are not us. And I'm bringing this up because earlier it was mentioned this idea of charismatic species, and that's an example of us idealizing a species, and that can be so dangerous, as was just pointed out. So what I love about this tale of a tree, this direction of the road story, is the fact that this tree is pompous. The tone is not pleasant all the time. We're left hearing, I will kill if that is required. And that grates against our human-centric notions of how the world should go, of the order of things. So that's something that I just wanted to highlight, and something that I think is really important in this conversation and in larger ecological narratives as well. I hope that made sense.
Beautiful. Heidi, what did you take away from working with the butterflies, and how gentle these scientists had to be with each fertilization?
I think the drive for me when making the film, or the fascination, was how someone is dedicating their lifetime to one specific study, and what Camille and Michael has worked on for decades in one area. I mean, they've worked in many places and done many things, but with the butterflies, and then seeing the butterflies in a quite small location and what effect that has on a global scale. So it's a reminder of that one species, as with all the other species as well, that it's interconnected. And I think it's really, in the longer time perspective that we are, it's not only the human time scale we're talking about, it's something that goes much, much into looking back to deep time, looking back into the future that we can't know yet. So I think that is just a little reminder, a little glimpse into something that is much bigger. So that's my takeaway from working on it.
No butterflies were killed in the making of Heidi's film.
That's right.
And Ali, you can finish this off in whatever way you want.
I feel like you just finished it so well, but just echoing everything everyone has said. There's, I mean, in my film, it expresses a lot of, and this has been spoken about already in other conversations, but there's a lot of futility around that type of work sometimes, and it might seem we might not be able to return to a point where human impact is, well, we certainly can't return to a point where human impact is not present. But there's so much care that goes into that work, and being able to witness and work with people who have dedicated their lives to this project is extremely humbling and incredible. And I have my criticisms toward my own relationship with the subject and my own relationship with that work, but ultimately it's it's extremely impressive and admirable. So thank you both as well.
Thank you, you three, for being here, and thank you for joining us on Zoom, and thank you all for coming to the screening today. I believe we have one more film at 8 p.m. this evening, so hopefully we'll see you back here. And the awards will be announced then. The highly